Many of you may remember it was 6 years ago that Gloria Ferraro Donnelly, on this stage, shared with us her quest for physical perfection. This evening, we are thrilled to have her back on this stage to share with us her quest for psychic perfection.
So as some of you know, maybe all of you know, I'm from South Philly. I'm Italian-American, and we didn't have a quest for psychic perfection back then because there was no such thing as anxiety or mental illness or any of that. If you had a problem, you took care of it the South Philly way. So let me explain. My mother had a friend by the name of Tessa, and Tessa was delusional. We all knew that that's the word we would use today, the clinical word, but my mother said Tessa, she had funny ideas. She was a little different, but never clinical ideas. And so this is how the conversation would go between my mother and Tessa. Tessa would come to the house very upset because of the things she was thinking and perceiving. And so one day she was in the kitchen with my mother, who had made the coffee and had pulled out the coffee cake. And Tessa says to my mother, you know, I got so upset Sunday in church because I was sitting in the front pew and the priest gave the sermon to me. And he knew all of the bad things that I had done. And I just sat there. I was frozen. And my mother said, "Don't sit there anymore. Sit in the back." And Tessa, from now on, back row. The priest won't even see you. It was interesting. Tessa would say, "Oh, okay." So there was that space between delusions beginning and going over the edge that my mother was always able to bridge. And then Tessa says, and you know, when I left the parking lot and I pulled out onto the street, 20 people were following me in their cars. And my mother said, "It's traffic. They're not following you. They're getting out of the parking lot like you did. So don't worry about it." Now, once my mother was finished with Tessa's session, she would call all the neighbors, tell all the neighbors what Tessa told her. They would talk about Tessa's problem because there was no confidentiality in South Philly, none. And there wasn't supposed to be. And then they would all show up at Tessa's house. This is the beginning of the support group. Okay. So now I go all through college, and I fell in love with psychiatric nursing. I did my psych nursing experience at the United States Naval Hospital during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and it just was absolutely amazing. So I said to my mother, "I'm going to work in psychiatry." "What's that?" "Well, you know, I work with people who, you know, Mom, kind of like people like Tessa." "Well, are you going to be able to make a living? There's nothing really wrong with her that a little coffee and cake won't." And I said, "Well, we might use coffee and cake, but I don't know." Okay, so I got a job at Epi. I was my first. And of course, one of the requirements when you work in clinical psychiatry or psychology is that you have to know yourself. And so you get into therapy yourself. And so I was home visiting my parents, and I happened to mention to my mother that I was entering therapy. I was seeing a psychiatrist. And she said, do not talk about the family. You are not to talk about the family. We don't tell our business to strangers. I said, well, I was really not a stranger. I mean, I'm paying him to listen. Even worse, don't pay people to listen. You don't tell your secrets to somebody else. And do not give him any of my recipes. I promised I would not. My mother always said that if you really wanted to know yourself, and I offer this to you, look in your closet. When I graduated from Bryn Mawr College with a PhD, I had walked behind Katharine Hepburn, who came back for our graduation. And after the ceremony at Bryn Mawr, we all went to South Philly for dinner. And my mother said to me, sitting at the table, I had my newly minted PhD and my autograph of Katharine Hepburn, and my mother said, you're going to clean your closets now. You've been going to school too long. So I promised her that I would. Look in your closet, because it is your id. If it's very organized, you might be a little OCD. But take a look. If you're feeling blue, clean your closet. My mother would say there were 3 things that helped you to feel better: cleaning, eating, and shopping. And that's all you needed. And actually, I think there's an evidence base for this. Now, if you were deeply depressed when you cleaned your closets, you should include the baseboards with that extra push. So now I graduate from seeing the psychiatrist to find myself to other forms of therapy. I was now in the faculty of Villanova. I had a colleague there who wanted me to join her in a course in psychodrama. I said to my husband, psychodrama I'm going to do it. 15 weeks, I had to drive to this place on Pine Street, and we had 10 people in a group, and the first thing we would do was write letters to an imaginary person about some drama or conflict in our lives. And then the therapist would pick the drama to be enacted that evening. And sometimes we would talk to an empty chair, or maybe 2 empty chairs. And when you had this conversation with the imaginary person in the empty chair, you then became that person and talked to the empty chair that you used to sit in. It's very complex. That Christmas, my husband bought me an ottoman because he knew I missed psychodrama. He knew I missed talking to the empty chair, and so he thought the ottoman might do the trick. For the most dramatic encounter that I experienced in psychodrama, I was picked, and you're picked to play certain parts in certain dramas. And we would pick and choose who we would want to be in our play. And Jean, my colleague from Villanova, picked me to be her dog. And that night, I spent an hour and a half on the floor, on my knees, with getting my head scratched and my back stroked, and it was actually neat. And I remember it to this day, being Miss Jean's dog. That was my big revelation in psychodrama that I can actually, for an hour and a half, act as a pet. Very, very tough for me to do, but I did it. So now, it's later in my career, and I'm now doing workshops around the country. I'm traveling around a lot, doing a lot of assertiveness training, particularly with nurses who worked in operating rooms. And I had trouble flying in airplanes. I had a very awful experience in a flight from Chicago to Philly. We were in a terrible storm over the Philadelphia airport. And after that flight, I was having lots of experience. So, of course, what do you do when you're a psychiatric nurse and you're in the field? You turn to what type of therapy would I need to get through this crisis? So, hypnosis. And I took a 14-week course and got certified in hypnosis. What most people don't know is that I sit through Dean's Council and executive faculty in a total trance most of the time. But nobody knows because I'm so good at it. So, did it work? I get on a plane, a flight to Pittsburgh, and I was doing really well, and there's a man sitting next to me, and we strike up a conversation, and I said, he says, are you visiting family? I said, no, I'm going to Pittsburgh, I have to work. Oh, he said, I'm going home to Pittsburgh. I delivered a 16-wheeler to Philadelphia, so now I'm flying home. Oh, I said, and we're sitting there, and we're right at the window where you could see the jet engines hanging off the wings. And he says to me, you see that engine, little lady? Now, little lady should have been my cue that this was not going to go well. I said, yes. He said, 7 bolts. Hold that on the wing. That's it. 7 bolts. All hypnosis, trance, everything went out the window. I grabbed the handles and white-knuckled it all the way to Pittsburgh, and then got on a flight to Youngstown, but the weather was bad, and we were being juggled all around, and it was a propeller plane with a wing over the top, and there were 2 vents in the front of the plane on the floor. I remember they were bronze. I was in the front seat. I had managed to put myself in a light trance because I was having trouble trancing after the last flight. And all of a sudden, as we begin to approach Youngstown, and we're on the approach to land, mist began to come in the plane through the vents. And the flight attendant, who happened to be a man, was walking in the mist, and I thought, we're dead. We died. And I had just seen the movie Heaven Can Wait with Warren Beatty walking through the mist. And I put myself in deeper and deeper. Do not remember landing. And I do recall being shaken, and never shake anybody when they're in a hypnotic trance. But of course, the flight attendant didn't know. Are you all right, ma'am? And I woke up and said, where are we? And he said, Youngstown. And I thought, what a disappointment. I thought we were in heaven, but we were in Youngstown, which doesn't cut it. And so that was my foray into hypnosis. I can tell you, for anyone who has difficulty with long meetings, I highly recommend it. Then I joined the East-West Academy of the Healing Arts. It was a group that every meeting started off with, the dragon that's under, 20 people get under this dragon costume and they run around. And we were in Washington walking through all of the exhibits where you could buy pet rocks, crystals. Actually, a pet rock bit me at that meeting. And we went to a booth. My husband and I went to this booth that said, "Do you want to come back?" And my husband said, "Oh, what's this all about? You mean back to the meeting?" "No, back from beyond." So if you died and you wanted to come back, you signed up at that booth. Did you sign up? He signed up. So I don't know exactly, of course, I was asking questions. Well, what's the mechanism? I mean, how do you get in touch? I mean, how do you? And they said, you have to trust. It's about faith. And so Joe signed up. I did not. Iwaha's motto was Iwaha, Iwaha, 10 hugs a day. And so we all went around this convention hugging everybody. Now, you got colds and germs and all of that, but then you went to the booth and you got your garlic. Because garlic is a way to manage stress. It's also a way to keep people away, which helps you to manage stress. And as a gift, you will all get your garlic when you leave, and I encourage you to keep it in your office and use it. I have a bowl of garlic in my office, and when certain people come in, I stick my face in order to relax, enough to get through the meeting. Okay, so my final foray into therapy was going on the couch. And I stayed there for 10 years. My younger daughter said to me one night, Mom, you really ought to go into therapy because you're nuts. Remember that? And I said, okay, do you have somebody in mind? She said, yes, I do. So I went into therapy and I stayed for 10 years. And I can tell you that the first crisis I had in therapy was whether or not I would ever go horizontal on the couch. We discussed this for 3 months. And he was psychoanalytically trained. He looked like Freud, fascinating. And he said, but Dr. Donnelly, always called me Dr. Donnelly, I would like you to think about lying on the couch and free associating. I said, I'm not doing it. Well, why not? I said, because I've read all the literature. You want to take a nap. You want me to lie on the couch. I said, you're not even recording it so you could hear it later on, so I'm not doing it. So we got past that. And then therapy for psychoanalysts, they sometimes are very secretive. And he swore me to secrecy in terms of my discussing what went on in the sessions and what we were talking about, what I was processing. But my best friend was seeing the same shrink. So one night, we talked every night, and she was a lot of fun. So one night she called me and she said, I was at my session last night, and my back was bothering me. So the doctor said, instead of sitting on the couch, here, sit on my rocker, and I'll sit there. I said, oh, he got off his rocker. That was good. So they switched, and it was a slat back rocker that had a rattan seat, a woven rattan seat. And when she sat on the seat, she was kind of big, she went through. So now she is sitting in the seat with her butt kind of touching the floor, and he is trying to pull her out of the chair, and finally she stands up, but the chair is still there, and they go back and forth, and of course she now is laughing hysterically, but he can't laugh, because that's not what you're supposed to do when you're an analyst. You're not supposed to laugh. So finally, he extricated her from the chair. I was seeing him 2 nights later, and she's laughing on the phone saying, "Don't you say anything." Well, I couldn't resist. So I went in and I sat on the sofa, and he was sitting on a straight back chair. And I said very seriously, I had rehearsed, "Where's your rocker? You're off your rocker tonight." And he got a little was trying to suppress the smile. And I said, "Is it out being repaired?" And finally he burst in laughing, and he said, "She told you. She violated the rules." And yes, I learned about transference, which is your feelings for the therapist and what the therapist represents. And I learned about countertransference, which are the feelings the therapist has for you and who you represent. But the best kind of transference that I have even written about is over-the-counter transference, which happens every single day at work. When you have that person come in where you want to stick your face in the bowl of garlic, that person is reminding you of someone in your past. And that is classic over-the-counter transference. So keep it in mind. Finally, I have discovered, I've given up all these forms of therapy because I have discovered the most cost-effective way to get all the help you need. Supermarket magazines. In literally 10 minutes in a supermarket line, if the line is long, you can clear up most issues going on in your life. And let me illustrate. So here we have feel more bliss than ever. If you're feeling self-critical, write yourself a note and say, "Don't be self-critical." Simple. Okay? If you're fearful, hear yourself out. Give yourself a talk. If you're plagued by regret, I love this one. Take a bath. Don't drown yourself. Just take a bath. And then if you're feeling down, soak in nature. And if you're anxious, join Iwaha, 10 hugs a day. This is the kind of great advice you get. And these magazines are only $1.50. I mean, I paid $75 an hour when I was seeing my shrink for 10 years, and he gave me a rate because I was a member of the profession. So add that up, it was about $8,000. I paid $3,000 for a personal trainer and lost 3 pounds. That's expensive. But this is $1.50. Here you go. What's your favorite tree? And what does it say about you? If you like apple trees, you're grateful. For what? You have to determine. If you're a willow tree, deceivingly, bending in the wind, but you're strong because you can bend in lots of directions. If you're a birch, At first I thought that said something else. But it is birch. Then you're a leader. If you're an oak, you're nurturing. This all for $1.50. Standing in the supermarket line, it's efficient. Look at here, instant confidence. If you have a saggy bust or a belly bulge, you could drop 8 pounds every week. I guess that could go on till you disappear. And then you could read all about the pseudo-allergies plaguing women. Remember, these books are pretty much solely for women. And then there's Dr. Oz, who has succumbed to commercialism, but it is fun to read his stuff because he's hawking probiotics now. So I won't go into that, but you have to read, you have to get a magazine with Dr. Oz on the cover for your collection. It's all about collecting. And then finally, and this is where I got this, soothe your nerves with sniffs of garlic. And here it is. Okay? There's research on this. It says the aroma and flavor of garlic can reduce your stress levels as much as 39%. How they came up with 39, I'll never know, but we have to read the studies. Red meat is rich in iron and all 9 essential amino acids, which relax and tense the muscles, but soothing your nerves with sniffs of garlic work. And so this is my new approach to stress management and to taking care of myself in my quest for psychic perfection. Finally, I did, at my earlier comedy in 2010, recommend shopping cart therapy. But I got into some trouble with that. And that is, once we've loaded the car, I like to take the cart and hurl it. It's worth one session of therapy to hear all the carts crashing. But one night in Wynwood, there was a stone on the driveway. And I hurled the cart, and it swerved and hit a Mercedes. So I don't do that anymore, but I highly recommend it if you can hurl it into a cart holder that is not near any cars. This is my final thought for you. This is what I live by. When I worked at LaSalle University, Brother Patrick Ellis said to me one day, I know your secret. You create stress for everybody else, and then you help them to manage it. So this is in dedication to Brother Patrick Ellis. It is the path to enlightenment, because everything is relative in life. And so if you create stress for others and help them manage it, you have found the path. Thank you.